Hello and welcome back to another episode of 5 at Phoenix. I'm Zoe Thompson. I'm the coach here at Phoenix Life and Wellbeing Coaching. We are live, recording this live. I'm joined today by Louise. Louise is going to introduce herself in just a moment. This is Fire 5 at Phoenix. The guest joins me with 5 questions on the monthly topic. This month we are talking about values and purpose. So incredibly important and kind of the golden thread in a lot of the work that I do. And I know that in the work that Louise does as well. So a fantastic guest today. So Louise has 5 questions. As I said, I haven't seen those questions. So really intrigued as to the questions Louise has chosen and the conversation that will come out of those questions. So that's enough from me. Louise, tell the people listening and watching in, who are you and what do you do?
Okay, well, firstly, Zoe, thank you ever so much for inviting me onto your show. I'm really pleased to come along and ask you my 5 questions. So I'm Louise McMilan. I'm an inspirational speaker and I talk about my own personal experience of mental health and breast cancer and how breast cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me, ironically. And from that, it's given me a whole new purpose in life. Purpose in life I think I knew I had beforehand, but it's really made me re-believe in myself. And now I'm helping primarily women overcome their limiting self-belief and lack of self-confidence, which was a cause of a lot of my depression and anxiety, to enable them to live life more fully. So I work with them one-to-one, really reigniting that belief and also what it is they want to achieve in life. And we're working with some incredible women and also some men, which has been good.
So important. And I suspect that this will come up in the conversation today, but the adversity and times of adversity and how it helps people to find their purpose or really tap into living that life of purpose and redirecting. Quite often when people have got off track a little bit, I find adversity and a little bit of a shake up is quite often the thing that helps people to get back on path. So I suspect we will talk about that more as this conversation goes on today. So do you want to kick off with the first question?
Yeah, I did. I was trying to think of some questions. Had loads, and I think I had about a list of 10 at one point. I was like, I've got to get some down. And I was trying to think of different questions that people might be interested in. And I think one thing we hear more often these days is the word role model. I think that's probably because of social media. And I think more so than when I was younger, I don't remember anybody ever saying to me, who's your role model growing up? So, and I know values obviously shape us as we're growing old, as we grow up. That's what impacts on us. So has there been a role model for you that helped you shape your values or even your purpose?
That's such a great question. I am the same as you. I don't remember people asking me that as a young person, or it's not something that I think adults get asked very often either. And I guess that is something that's with social media and with us being able to access and see people much more visibly now. I think it's much easier to see or be influenced by who we see as role models, isn't it? Because we have access to them. I guess in the days before good old Tinternet, we weren't really able to see what was going on with people other than what was in the mainstream media. I don't remember having one growing up, actually. I wonder whether something will pop into my mind later on, but I don't remember having one as a teenager. I mean, for me now, there's lots of sports people who aspire to be alike, or I am inspired by them. I think a lot of that is the drive and determination. A lot of it is about their mindset. But I think also what I'm noticing a lot more recently is how they use their platform to influence and get involved in things that are wider than sport, that are wider than themselves. And I've got a huge admiration for that, because it comes with a huge amount of criticism. And I think there's a lot of people who step into that knowing that what they are saying is true to their values, but it's not necessarily what people who might be a sports fan expect them to say or want them to say. And so I think, especially with what's happening in the world at the moment, I think there's a lot of focus, isn't there, on sports people to stand and speak up for their own values. And I think some people are really uncomfortable with that because they don't want them to be anything more than that sports person. So huge admiration for that. And I think a lot of people, you know, I always talk about Serena Williams, excuse me, Serena and Venus, to be fair. And I know Serena's been in the spotlight a lot more, but there's so much for her that resonates with me. You know, the fact that, you know, she's a mum, and she sort of champions her sport, and she's been successful in her sport, and also, you know, that real hands-on parenting role. But I think also she's had to overcome so much that has actually, you know, she's almost kind of flattened the grass to make it easier for people to walk that path behind her. And I think anybody in any industry that is the first person to take that stand and walk that path, knowing how difficult that path is, but, you know, just the analogy that comes to me is flattening that grass to make it easier for other people to walk that path. And whether that's sports people or leaders, managers, I've got a huge amount of admiration for them. So yeah, I think Serena Williams will always be one that jumps forward. I think she gets a really tough time with the press, but again, stays true to her values and what's important to her. What we're seeing with Naomi, I'm not sure of the pronunciation of her last name, but the other tennis player who's taken that stand around mental health more recently. For anyone who's watching knows that I'm a huge basketball fan, and I think certainly both American and British basketballers standing up for their values and what they believe in. We're seeing it in football. So I think there's a real kind of shift. I mean, Muhammad Ali did it, but he was sort of, again, I think he was one of the first people who really went against the grain, wasn't he, and standing up for what he believed in. But again, has created that path to help empower others to be able to do the same. And I think it's really important. I think it's really important that young people see the people who they have as role models having that courage to stand up for what they believe in, because I think that's a really important message for all of us, young people, young or old. I think it's a really important message to have that courage to stand up and say, I don't agree with that. I don't feel that's fair, or I don't feel that that is equal, or I don't feel that it's inclusive. I think it's a really important message. That was a really long answer to a very short question. I could have just given you a name. Sorry.
This is a really good question, because actually what it does, it really lovely leads on to my next question, because I think sometimes when a lot of people get a lot of flack about standing up for their values, it's because the other person isn't resonating with them.
Yeah.
Because they're not the same values. But also, sometimes two people can share the same value, but actually it means something totally different. Quite often with my clients, I'm always saying to them, okay, what does that word mean to you? And they kind of look at me as if to say I'm off my rocker because I should know what it means. I don't mean what the Oxford English Dictionary or whatever dictionary or Google says. What does that word actually mean to you? So in your experience, have you ever had that where, you've had to really have a debate or something about what that value means to you and the impact on that?
Yes, really. I do exactly the same. And I've got a worksheet that I go through with people and get them to highlight what values that resonate with them. And I always say the same thing, make sure that you go with what it means for you and how you interpret it and your experience, if you like, with that value. And I think that is really important. And I think when the time that it highlighted the most for me was I did a workshop with a charity in Bristol, an amazing charity called 125, who work with women who they work with three kind of categories of women who are street workers. So they work with women who are still working on the street, that they give them that support. They have a drop-in centre for them. They have women who have come out of it, or in the process of coming out of it, and help them with that support and counselling, and helping them to get back into sort of come back into find a new way of living. And then they also work with the women who have historically worked in it and develop them into role models and support people that can come back and support women that are further down on that journey. And I did a workshop with them on values, and it was really interesting when some of them were picking out different words of how things like security, safety and security, and what that meant for them in comparison to other people that I've run the same exercise with, what security has meant for them. And I think that for me was probably the one time where it's really highlighted what these different words, but also what our expectation is, or what we feel is really important. And I think that's, people joke, don't they, and say first world problems, that actually for some people security is financial security, or that security might mean something completely different. For some of these women in the group, it was the real kind of baseline. I want to feel safe, I want to feel secure, I want to live in an environment where I'm not worrying about my security and my safety. So I think it really highlighted to me of just how different our experiences can be with some of these values, and how that shapes our purpose, how that shapes into what we want for ourselves, for children, for families, for friends. It really can have such a strong influence in how it shapes that.
Yeah, and I guess it's also shapes what the meaning is at different times in their lives. They'll go from a security of having somewhere safe to live and to nurture their children and loved ones, to then being that whole security of having that financial independence. And so the word will always be there because it means much, but they'll just, the meaning of it inside will just change as life changes for them.
And I think that was the interesting conversation in the room, was that there were women in different stages of that journey. And so how that word, even just to use that word security, how that was evolving for the women in the group, as in how they were seeing that word in terms of where they were on their journey. And it was, I think what was really lovely was that there were women who were kind of a lot further on and had been through rehab, counselling, support, that were now sort of in those stages of coming back into employment, that were having their own homes and things like that. The way they were able to talk about, oh gosh, I remember that's what it meant to me then, this is what it means to me now. Just that real feeling of hope in the room, and just to give those other women, just even talking about that one word and what it meant for all of them, in being able to see how they were reflecting on their past relationship with that word, and how others were looking to be able to build that relationship with that word itself. So it was it's an amazing charity, and they're doing an amazing work with the women. But I think it was a workshop for me in terms of learning, just as it was for them. So I took a lot away from that. So
because it inspires you as well as inspiring other people.
Absolutely.
Their stories and how one word can mean so much differently.
And everybody has something to teach us, right?
Absolutely. And it kind of reminds me of reflecting on a conversation I had with a nephew a while ago. And I suppose it's, again, for young people in these days, they seem to have a lot more things sort of put on them, the whole exam things, everything else. But when I was thinking of questions, I remember this reflection, this conversation. My nephew was going about when at school, what is it you want to be? What's your 5-year plan? And really having to meet with this, and then it's that thing of, well, they have their plans of school and everything else, and then they come out into the wild world and go, and what now, kind of thing. And it's, well, they've been shifted this way, so they've got to follow it. So and it just feels that young people have to have things figured out a little bit more sooner than what perhaps we did. I don't know, maybe it's just a reflection from that conversation. So I wanted to know from you is, how far into your life did you kind of acknowledge what your real purpose was, and then how long did it take you to take the steps that you wanted to take?
I think I'm still working some of it out. I don't think I've got it all figured out just yet. I'm very, very early on. I think just the only option for me was to follow in sort of parents' footsteps. I wanted to be in the police, and I suspect a lot of that was, the kind of the obvious things about helping people, and being able to do something good and give something back. Potentially driving fast cars and blue lights and a little bit of an adrenaline might have had something to do with it. But also I think what I did know was that I did not want a 9 to 5 where I was doing the same thing day in and day out. And I fully appreciate a lot of people crave routine. They like structure, they like routine. I love a bit of chaos. I like a bit of disruption. I like to know what's not coming. And I think that's why I have not really ever had that sort of long-term plan. And I think certainly with the police, what that offered me was not just the variety, but also so many different opportunities, but still in the same organisation. And so I definitely tapped into that, and I was there for 20 years and did lots and lots of different roles that definitely had variety, definitely had, the unknown, and being able to work with what was going on and not knowing what was going to happen next, and definitely ticked a lot of those boxes. But I think because I started there at 18, I was still trying to work all of that out about, what did I want? And so I think a lot of that, the journey in that 20 years was having opportunities come up and seizing those opportunities and then making the most of those opportunities, as opposed to having a plan and waiting for, okay, what's the next step on the plan? Right, well, anticipating when that might come up. And so I know some people really like to work that way, but it's something that I always found really difficult. And I always joke now about how I only ever plan 3 months at a time. I've got an idea of what I want to achieve in the next 12 months, but most of it is planned in detail on shorter time frames. So I think what I learned over those 20 years was really what helped to shape working out, okay, what do I want? Reflecting back on different roles, different opportunities. What did I really enjoy? Where did I really kind of thrive? Which departments? What was it about those departments that I enjoyed or got more, had much more fulfillment in those roles? And over the 20 years, I ended up in a senior management role. But what I learned was it wasn't the management role that I enjoyed in terms of the level of responsibility, decision making, all of that kind of stuff. It was more about having more influence over the people that I was responsible for and the people development. And so with that, I ended up having opportunities to coach and mentor. And then, it was 2014, had the opportunity to be a self-development trainer as well. And that was the point where I did the trainer course. And I think it got to the Wednesday morning 5-day course. And I remember saying out loud, this is what I want to do. I just remember having that light bulb moment halfway through the session. Said, I've always really enjoyed the day job, but this is what I want to do. And at that point, that Wednesday evening, because it was a residential course, I remember going back to the room and just thinking, right, how can I make this happen? And I think that was probably the first time that I'd really started to think a little bit further ahead. So I think if I look at, what my intentions initially with wanting to be in the police, probably not dissimilar to what I do now. I'm still helping people.
Yeah.
I'm still, working to help people, develop. There's still lots of the management kind of people development side that comes into it, supporting people to, choose their own path and find their own way, helping people to find their voice. There's lots of things in there that I do now that I have done over the years, but I didn't start out thinking that. It's something that has evolved along the way. And so, to talk about, your nephew and young people, I think working out what's important, working out what at the moment is negotiable, not negotiable for you, where do you get, where are your passions? What is it you enjoy doing? What are you good at? And that you enjoy doing, because that might be two different things. And I think helping people to understand that is really important, because the way I describe it with people is that you're then looking at the ingredients rather than a fully defined recipe or a cake. You're looking at what are all the ingredients, because then that helps, I think, open people's eyes a little bit wider, rather than saying, well, this is my career choice, or this is the type of job I want to do, because that then narrows it, doesn't it, into one field, if you like. Whereas if you have a list of, these are all the things that I really love to do, that I'm good at, that potentially I can be paid for, then it opens up a lot more opportunities in terms of seeing those ingredients in different recipes.
Yes.
I always come back to food at some point.
I love that analogy, because I always turn around and say to, my nephews and my niece, it's knowing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you do want to do. But until you try something, you don't know. And I guess it's like the food, isn't it? You don't know you don't like it till you try it.
Yeah.
And it's that, but obviously there's certain things straight up with it, that I'm never going to be a deep sea diver, because I just don't like going in the water. So, but that straight up. So you're not going to stop, but it's, you're quite right to say, it's knowing all the different.
Yeah, and I'm never going to work in finance, because maths is not my strong point, but sitting and working with numbers and that level of detail and focus and repetition that's not a good place for me. But I fully understand and admire people who do love to work that way. But we're all very different, and I think that's what's really important, is work out, how do you want to spend your day? Do you want variety, or do you like routine? Do you want something that you can go into the work and know what your day is? Do you want to have something that you hand over at the end of the day, or do you want something that you have ownership for, that you see through from start to finish? Are you a starter or are you a finisher? Do you like to create and design and come up with the ideas and then hand it over? Or do you like to have a list of things to go away and do and then make it happen? They're all really important things to work out, but it's not, from what I understand, it's not the conversation that schools, careers advisors are necessarily having with young people. Maybe that's more for us as parents, family members, to have those conversations outside of the school career options. But I think, and I've said this in so many different types of conversation, the world is changing at such a rapid rate. What is an option right now and what is an option in 5 years' time? The options that are likely, if you go into university now as a 4-year course, there's going to be things that don't exist right now that are going to be an opportunity when you come out of that course. So I think it's really important. Understand what's important, what isn't, what's negotiable, what isn't, and what is your, what is valuable to you, what is of value to you, that you want to have in life.
Yeah, and it's understand the impact you want to make and what's going to make you happy each day.
Yeah.
My background was HR, as a HR generalist, and there was times when I just focused on the whole ER side of things, and every day I'd wake up going, am I going to be doing disciplinary? Am I going to be doing a grievance? Is it ill health? Is it a poor performance? And it was like, where's the positive in that? And there is a positive, because you're trying to help the individual.
Yeah.
Even just those titles can just sort of have that impact of, is something not good happening, instead of going, okay, what's inspiring that person and how can you help make a difference to get the best out of them? And sometimes it's the round peg in the square hole.
Yeah.
They're just in either the wrong job, the wrong role, the wrong company, and just need to move on. And I think sometimes we forget that. And so I think when we're talking to young people, it's trying to say some, be a bit broader, be open. Whilst education might want to try and get you into this, you've got to have an idea if you're going to, sixth form university. It's having that,
Yeah.
that broadness. And I know so many people have gone off and done so many degrees and have not done anything with them because they've then gone on a different path.
Yeah, it's on. I can't remember who talked about it. I'm sure it was on one of these episodes. It might have been with the guys from Three Peeps in a Podcast, because we had very similar conversations around young people and career options and around setting their goals at that age. But I remember somebody said to me, it's almost like university comes at the wrong time. You almost need to, it would almost be more beneficial if university came in your 20s or 30s rather than at sort of 18, 19, because you can go off, live a little, work out what it is that you want, and then invest that time and energy and effort into that degree. But you also have a little bit more about you, don't you? Because you've come out of that quite protective education system, seen the world a little bit, I think you've got more information to help you make that decision.
Yes, and your eyes are open because you can actually, see things and
yes,
that you wouldn't normally see in the protective way of a classroom or a lecture theatre.
Yeah, and I think at sort of 17, 18, for a lot of young people, it's still very heavily shaped by parents and other influences. So, if we talk about values and purpose, it's still, I think, quite heavily influenced by parents at that point. I think we're still, at 18, are you really clear on what your values are, or how have you had enough sort of experiences of your own to help test and shape that?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, are they your values, or are they somebody else's values that you're trying to live up to those expectations? And it's quite a big ask.
Yes.
Because I don't think you know yourself, do you? It's like we were saying earlier on, going through something like adversity kind of helps you kind of be a bit more in tune with what your values are and what it is you want to do.
Yeah, and I think that's that's the challenge, isn't it, of when you go through something yourself, so it tests all of these things, doesn't it? It tests the strength of them, it tests how strongly you want to fight for these things. And I think that's the challenge, isn't it, of knowing what you're fighting for. And I think sometimes that's where you realize that you've been fighting for something that actually isn't that important. And that's when you choose to leave things behind and you choose to take different options, different decisions.
Yeah. So what was the big life change for you then that made you sort of reflect on your values and kind of purpose? Was there a big life change?
I think there's been lots of things. If I'm being honest, I think there's been lots of things that have happened that I think have just really made me stop and think. And I think it is that fight for, I think it's that there are some people who come in and test them, and there are some people that come in and strengthen them. And I think I've been, in hindsight, it's not always been comfortable, but I think, I am grateful that for those people in helping me to see what was important to me, whether that was because they came in and tested them, or whether it's because they came in and empowered me to stand up for them, stand in that space for them. I think there's probably things that have happened that have probably had more of an influence, and there's probably some individuals that have had more of an influence. Whether they're aware of that or not, I don't know. But I think it's that there's just things that happen in life, aren't there, that just, like you said, with your cancer diagnosis, or, with work situations, they just force you to stop and think and question. Yeah. And we need those events, because otherwise we just continue. It's just that like a conveyor belt, isn't it, of just kind of rolling through. We need those times to just really make us stop and think of, who am I and what am I doing here? And am I, living the life that I want to live, or am I living a life that other people want for me? Am I living, somebody else's life, or am I living a life that's just being really heavily shaped and influenced by somebody else? And is that what I want? And we do need those times to really force us to stop and think. And they have to be uncomfortable, because if it's comfortable. We didn't do anything.
No.
So they have to be uncomfortable experiences. They're not uncomfortable forever.
No, that's
And
right.
actually, like you described at the beginning, sometimes it makes life so much more full afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's just going through, but it's pushing through that period. You don't want to sit there. This is not a place to sit and spend lots of time, but they are really important. They are important times in our lives. But I think what we have a tendency to do is to try and avoid it because it's not comfortable. So we'll bury our head in the sand, or we'll take a different route to try and avoid that from happening, or we just kind of complete denial that anything is going on. But these, they are important and they're happening for a reason, but you need to sit with it and work it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And also take those steps afterwards, because I think there's quite a few people that will go through some big change, life-changing event, and know they want something different, but won't take the risk to move forward, and still back into that whole comfort zone, and still reflect, going, I can't, I no longer can do anything about that, because at the time is when you really feel that difference, and that push is not always there. So you've got to take that sign that they say, there's always a sign. Take that sign and take it with it.
And it's back into the comfort zone because it's familiar. But eventually familiar becomes uncomfortable. So it will go on, it will put you back in that position, and things will keep happening, and it will just keep coming up. It will keep coming up in different ways. I do think that you can only ignore things for so long. It will just keep coming back. And yes, there is, I get it. It is uncomfortable to take those first steps, but you're working your way forward to something that is what you want, not what anybody else wants. Is working to what you want. And I think that then it's the reward, isn't it? Of, yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, you've got to keep that momentum and consistency and keep that moving forward. But the reward for that is so much better than the comfortable and the familiar.
Yeah, definitely. And I think COVID has kind of impacted a lot more people with this, haven't they? And some people have relished the whole staying at home. Other people have found it difficult. So we've all gone through our own journey with COVID. As we always say, everybody's cancer journey is different. Everybody's mental health journey is different. Everybody else's COVID journey is different. And I think, from people now going back into workplace, whether they've been working from home, or these relationships and stuff, there may be someone listening in that's kind of going, I've now got in tune with what my values are, but maybe experiencing some, pushback or, dismissiveness from family or friends or even colleagues. Perhaps they're working on a new project and they've gone back into work and it's going, my values not aligned with other people. What is your kind of advice, or if you've got any experience that you could give somebody that says, this is how you manage when there's a conflict of values or things?
I think it's there's a shift at the moment, and I don't know whether you've noticed this, but I've had a real flurry of calls in the last maybe month, 2 months of the reality check now that we're moving forward into this new, the next step, coming out of periods of lockdown, but coming into this kind of mishmash of working, and people are trying to work it all out. And I think there are definitely a group of people that are really ready. They just want to get back into an office. They like the routine, they like the structure, they like working with different people. But there's also, and I think, quite a significant number of people who are having that dawning realization of, I don't want this. This is not what I want. I've had 12 months to take that step back, to work out, when things have been taken away because of restrictions, what was important, what didn't I miss? I've had 12 months to work out my own routine, make things work for me, find my own way of working, and I think from an individual or a company perspective, if productivity hasn't dropped, makes it very difficult now for companies to argue that home working, flexible working isn't feasible. So I think it's almost a shift on two parts. There's the individual shift of, actually, I have benefited so much from making these changes, but also feeling like they've got much more stable ground to argue and make these points.
Yeah.
And I think because so many companies are really open to that flexibility and a real mishmash of, well, what works for you? You tell us what works for you and we can make that work. And having sort of those one-to-one conversations to have that team dynamic. Because ultimately, from a business perspective, if you've got individuals on your team who are telling you, this is how I work best, you benefit. As a business, you benefit because you've got somebody who is telling you how they can be a high performer, how they can be most productive. So as a company, you really want to tune into that, because that's where you'll get your best workers. But ultimately, I think people are seeing that they've got a much more kind of solid ground to argue that case of, why do I need to do this? Why do I need to do it this particular way? This doesn't benefit me. And I think because other companies are more open to it, people are seeing options. Well, if you don't do that, then I will look elsewhere. And I think that's what I'm seeing a shift in people, is that real kind of realization of, I've now got to, and I think it feels like going back. And that's not comfortable for a lot of people, isn't it? Because you think, well, I've worked so hard, we want to keep moving forward. And if it feels like you're taking a step back, that undoes everything that you've done over the past 12 months. That's not what people are looking for. And so I've definitely noticed an increase of people in the last month where they're saying, no, not doing it. Help me work out how I can make what I want from work-life family balance. How can I help me to work out how to make it happen? And I think there is a real shift there. Can you just repeat the question though, because I think I went off on a bit of a tangent.
That's okay. Yeah. So I mean, what you've answered is great. It's great, because I think there is that thing about people coming back to work and the workplace values and individual values. I guess there's this other thing about individual having the two different conflict of values together.
Yeah.
Maybe they're working on a project, maybe they're at workplace, or they've had this realization and they now are being really in tune what their values and their purpose are, but they're getting some kind of resistance from family or friends to go, why would you want to do that for? Or you can't do that. And
that's tough, isn't it? Because sometimes it can take it can be really difficult for people to work that out, and then to have the confidence to step into that and say, this is what's important for me. And I definitely have noticed, because the world is changing and businesses are changing, because they have to, that quite often people, what people signed up for when they first went into a job, the values probably did align at that point. And then because the world has changed, businesses have had to change, those values aren't in alignment, and now sometimes are in conflict. I noticed it, when years ago I worked in what was originally set up as a police call centre. So all of the non-emergency calls. Now, when we first started it up, mobiles were in existence, but they weren't smartphones in the way that they are now. And so when we first set it up, we were looking for individuals who were very much about support, about that real customer service, about being able to support the caller on the end of the phone, and the kind of the vision, if you like, was that you would resolve their inquiry so that they didn't need to call back in again. And if that took half an hour and a couple of calls, it took half an hour and a couple of calls. So when we originally set it up, that was who we recruited. We recruited people who were really passionate about customer service, excellent communication skills. That was the focus. But over time, as technology changed, as police demand changed, it became very much sort of more of like the control room dynamic of triage and getting people to different places to resolve it. So then what you're looking at is a very different set of skills, but also a very different set of values, because it was much more about the decision making and speed of response and being able to clear things down. And so the people who we'd recruited who were very much about customer service found it a real challenge, because they weren't able to spend as much time, because there was much more pressure on dealing with the call a lot more quicker, a lot more efficiently, which makes sense because you had that extra demand. But for some of those individuals, some were able to adapt, and they were able to still pull out the customer service element from that, just in a smarter, more efficient way. But others who had really taken that joy and kind of that fulfillment from being able to spend lots of time really giving that attention, they really struggled with it. Yeah. Understandably. So it was about helping to, them to find something within the organization that was much more suited to what was important to them. And I think it's the same with individuals, isn't it? Of knowing and understanding what's important to you and why you want to make these decisions. But I think it's listening, isn't it? So much of this is listening and understanding. And there's always a fear, isn't there? I think, especially with family and friends, because we care and we want the best for people, and we want people to be happy and to be successful. But our values might shape what we determine that to look like.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So there's, I guess from the person who's trying to explain it, explain why it's important, explain what about it is important, explain what it is that you're trying to achieve. I think also help them to understand what your success looks like, what happiness looks like for you, what fulfillment looks like for you, because it might be very different for them. And I think for the person who's listening, just it's that curiosity, isn't it? You might have your own concerns about what that might look like or what that might result in, but come at it from a place of curiosity, of just just really want to understand it. And if you do have a fear, just question whether it's your own fear of if you were in that situation, because it might not be a fear for them. It might not be something. It might be something that excites them. It might be something that actually they're not worried about. But again, it's checking your own values and judgment in comparison. So I think it's that two-way conversation, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? It's that openness, that seeking to understand, isn't it? And it's it's the person who has the values who may feel that other people are dismissing it as well, to go, and actually, am I being cautious because I feel I'm not living up to their expectations? And you're quite right, it's having that conversation. So it's, if you're someone that's dismissing it, as you quite rightly say, it's understand where that's coming from. But if you're the person that's feeling it, is going, where is that coming from? And having those open conversations. And it doesn't matter how old you are. I remember a few years ago going up to have a conversation with my mum and dad, to turn around and say, this is the career change I was going to have, and plan it all through my head, what I was going to say, potentially what may come back as a response to it. And I remember going for a walk. I didn't drive up there, I walked up there so I could slowly think it all through. And but it doesn't matter what age you are, if you haven't doing any kind of change, and you can go, this is what I am, this is what my purpose is. It can be a perception, even though it's not. And it's just chatting it through, and asking for what support you need, and saying, this is, when you say things like, this doesn't help me, I know it might be something you feel like you have to say, but say it in there, don't say it from here. And
but it's the acknowledgement on both sides, isn't it? It's when somebody says, oh, are you not worried about this? Say, well, no, I've thought it through. And I can understand why you might worry about it, but I've thought it through and I've put this in place. And so I think it's not being dismissive that either party feels a certain way about a certain thing. It's acknowledging, oh, actually, no, I can understand why you would feel like that. Or actually, why would you? I don't understand why you would feel like that. What is it that worries you about that? So it's the curiosity and the understanding and the acknowledgement on both sides.
Absolutely.
So even if you're the individual and it's like, it's my thing, you don't need to worry about it. It's like, actually ask what is it about that worries them?
Absolutely.
Because it's probably from a good place of very good intention, and you can acknowledge that and go, actually, I love the fact that you're worrying,
yes,
but I've thought it through. It's okay. I've thought it through and I've put X, Y, and Z in place. But I love the fact that you're worrying. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is that
nice that you care.
yeah, thanks for caring. Because we would also not be happy if they didn't care. Like, oh, well, they didn't seem to be very worried about that. They don't care.
Yeah.
So what do you want?
Absolutely. And you know, all our values we have and all our purposes in life, none of them are wrong.
No.
It's just that's who we are, and it's recognizing that we are all different. You know, as you were saying earlier on about, you know, changing that whole call center thing. You know, some people are task oriented, some people are visual, some people are fast, and some people are steady, and it's just having that whole mix, and they complement each other, and we're all a bit of everything.
Yeah.
But we're just stronger in our different elements, and that's why our values and our purpose in life are different because of who we are.
And I you know, this is, if you're a team leader, I think even from a family perspective, is understanding, you know, it's, I think organizations that, you know, some of them are very focused on the sort of personality types and the ways of working. Knowing the values of your team is really important. Knowing the values of your family members is really important, whether you have that as an open conversation or whether you have that, okay, the interpretation of what you recognize in terms of people's behavior and people's responses to things, understanding, okay, this is what I think is important to them. Because that's how you bring your team together, isn't it? Because you can adapt your communication to acknowledge and from that way of understanding what's important to them. So if you're having a conversation with somebody who is, you know, their values are about let's just say continue. So one of mine is continuous improvement. So if I had a manager communicating with me, it's not about praise or success of an achievement. It's about the recognition that I did better than I did the last time. So it's not, for me, it's not about the end result. It's about understanding that I am moving forward. So praise for me is like, oh, you know, did you notice that you improved on this from the last time? Or that's it's not about the end result for me. But if you've got somebody who's very much about that, for them it's about the completion of the task, that's how you would want to reframe that communication for them. But even in a team briefing, understanding that different people are going to have different things that they're listening out for and that they want to tap into is really important. And the same around the family table, isn't it? Of knowing that, okay, this individual is much more going to be, you know, much more, this is more important to them. But actually the person sitting next to them doesn't give a monkeys about that, but will get really kind of passionate about this element of it. So it's all part of understanding people. But I think values and the needs just get, you know, I think they get overlooked a lot. And I certainly from, you know, when I get, you know, from a group workshop setting, when we talk about values and needs, for a lot of people it is a light bulb and it's a breakthrough of, oh my gosh, I'd never thought about it from that perspective. And people come back and say, well, I've just changed the way that I've delivered messages or communicated with their values in mind, and it made such a difference. So
the reaction and what you get back from it is always different.
But I think it's just an important thing about getting to know people as well, isn't it? Of who are they and what makes them tick, what's important to them.
Because it's often people try and say these are my values, and it sounds like, you know, they're solid and they're like a barrier, and it's not about it. It's about just understanding them even more, and they're, you know, it's an open to have great conversations.
Because there's so many stories behind it of what shapes that. Absolutely. And that's where you get into the human element. And I love that bit. As a self-confessed person, that's the best bit.
Growing up in one.
I think you've frozen. Just wait a moment just to see if you unfreeze. And she's back.
Always happens. Yeah, I was just saying, you could have people growing up in the same household, like me and my sisters, and we're all totally different, but we've all been,
Yeah.
brought up in, growing up in the same household, same parents the whole time, and
Yeah.
differently. And I guess that's a whole new conversation we can have about order of births.
Yeah, the good old family dynamic, eh?
Yeah, that's been brilliant. Thank you.
Is that all 5? I wasn't counting.
That was all 5. Yes.
Was it incredible? There's sometimes I've kind of got a bit of an awareness, but you haven't. I think you've just slipped the questions seamlessly into what felt very much like a nice long conversation. So thank you very much, and lots to take away. I know when I come to do the highlights of this, there'll be lots to choose from. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was such a great conversation, and I say this every time, but I think just having those, having different guests, even though you've all been given, that's it, 3 words, isn't it? Values and purpose, 3 words, but to have these different conversations to come out of it has been incredible. I really enjoy doing these. So
absolutely, and I've enjoyed listening to your past guests on the different subjects as well, and the different takeaways that you have. So it's been a real honour to be invited to come and speak.
Well, thank you so much for giving me your time and coming in. And it's been really interesting. And for people watching or listening back, the comments stays open. So if you have any questions as you're watching back, feel free to ask. My contact details are in there. Louise's contact details are in there. Find Louise across social media, give her a follow. And if you've enjoyed the conversation today, do check out earlier sessions, and feel free to subscribe and share as well. If we have talked about things today and you know someone who's working through something and you think actually they might find this conversation beneficial, please do feel free to share. So we've got 2 more guests left on this topic and on this season, so we will be back again next week. But thank you so much to Louise, excuse me, for your time, and thank you to you for watching and listening in. Very, very much appreciated, and we'll see you again very soon.